Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast, mailbag edition on a Monday. Prehm and Erik Skopil on the show, and it's double duty time. Basketball season's here. We'll get into more basketball podcasts and more focus on that later. I do want to tease, we will have about 5 guys on the men's basketball team on a podcast, similar to what we did with the football team, and some of those interviews all strung together. But Erik, it's the number 1 football team in the country. Your Oregon Ducks. They are 9-0. They should be dominating the conversation, even on opening day for basketball, and that's where we're going to keep it. It's a football-centric show today, as it should be, because this team's pretty damn fun to watch.
I think it's hard not to be having fun if you're an Oregon fan. One of 5 undefeated teams in a position here to make a run at something really special. Probably a couple wins away from locking up and solidifying their place in the Big Ten championship game in Indy. I think we all think they'll be there, but you still have to take care of business here down the stretch of the regular season. First half of the show, Matt, is going to be basically the fallout of some injuries. Yep. Second half, we'll get into kind of more big picture. People still have thoughts on the third quarter. They want ours. So we'll get into that after the break. But to start here, we'll open up the question from @MikeWees23, who asks, follow you guys. You all do great work. My question is, how confident do you feel in this receiving group going forward with Tez potentially out for a significant time? Clearly, flattery is the key to getting your question on the show. He opened by telling us he loved our work and he thought we did good work. So thank you, Mike. We appreciate that. I'm pretty confident in their ability to maneuver these next 3 games. I think we talked about this right after the game on Saturday. Like, you look at the schedule: Maryland, Wisconsin, Washington. Those aren't games that really strike a lot of fear in you. And I will say, I think Oregon has 3 receivers you feel very good about right now, with Evan and Trayshawn on the outside and Justice Lowe at slot. And I should say, with Tez out, Justice played almost exclusively there. I think he had 52 of something like 65 snaps played in the slot. So that's clearly the replacement there. I do have concerns about depth. And I don't know if we want to run through all that quite yet here, Matt. But I think it seemed like after the game on Saturday, we were kind of in lockstep thinking, like, I don't know if this is going to bite them the way the rest of the regular season comes down, but you sure think, man, Tez was very impactful in the first game with Ohio State. If they played them again, and that game's as close as it was the first time, you really need to be kind of having all hands on deck. And how do you feel if you were to play Ohio State again, or even Indiana for that matter, in a Big Ten championship game without your top receiver? So I think that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm not really worried about the rest of this month. I think they'll be fine. And I think, frankly, like, there's a couple questions that were like, oh, it seemed like the offense struggled without him. They put up 38 points, which is the most they scored in Big Ten play. They had 28 in the first half. Like, he wasn't on the field for any of those points. So, it's not like the offense completely fell apart without him. I thought Trayshawn stepped up. Justice Lowe keeps stepping up. Evan Stewart had some incredible plays. Like, I think you feel really good about those 3, but there are depth concerns. And then my concerns are the ceiling of this group when you go against the elite talent teams.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon's operated for almost essentially the entire year with 3 guys. First, it started out with it being Tez, Trayshawn, and Evan. And then when the Ohio State game was played and Trayshawn was suspended or kicked out of the game for a spitting incident, that kind of forced the action with Justice Lowe. Like, he had played prior to that, but nowhere near the level that he had played since. And so when Holden was kicked out and then suspended, we'll use air quotes, suspended, because they never actually said that, for the Purdue game, they lost Holden in the rotation, but then it elevated Justice, and he held his water and was totally fine in that regard. And when Holden got back against Illinois, he didn't start. And he's effectively, at least for now, has lost his starting spot, because we don't know what. Look, I don't think any of us are thinking Tez Johnson plays on Saturday at Maryland, but
no,
until that becomes 100% definitive, you can't say Holden starts guaranteed. But he's probably going to be a starter again on Saturday. But Lowe effectively had taken his spot. So for about a week, you had 4 receivers and you felt good about it. And now Tez is gone and you're back to 3. So like they've kind of operated how they've operated all season long. It's just now you lose your number 1 player at the position in Tez. And I think it's a disservice to Tez, and it's not a slight to anyone else. But his playmaking ability in space, his electricability, how electric he is with the football, his route running, it's second to none really on this team. Evan Stewart's got the home run threat, but we haven't seen him like juke and weave through a defense like Tez has. Holden certainly has the breakaway speed, and we saw that against Michigan. But he is not the hey, get him the ball on a 1-yard screen and he'll make 2 defenders miss and turn a 3-yard gain into a 25-yard gain in a touchdown like he did against Illinois. That will impact things there a little bit. But I guess like the question is like how do we feel about this group? Like without Tez against Maryland and at Wisconsin and against Washington, fine. Like they will be fine. It will probably be the targets will probably be dispersed more evenly than they were with Tez on the field, but Oregon's offense probably won't miss much of a beat. We should also note like Ferguson's back now. He had a big catch in that Michigan game. And then we should also point out Kenyon Sadiq has kind of come on just like Justice Lowe did with Trayshawn Holden out when Ferguson was out the last 2 games because of his appendix being removed. Sadiq has kind of flourished. I don't know what it is, but they finally started giving him normal routes instead of tight end arounds and weird, funky formation plays. They're just straight up giving him the ball in space, and he's doing a really good job. So, this number of targets and guys out there is technically deeper than it was, but you don't have your top guy. But they should be fine. Now, against Ohio State, against Texas, against Georgia, that becomes a concern. It's not one that Oregon can't overcome because it's Evan Stewart's still a dynamic player. Trayshawn Holden is still a dynamic player. You've got 2 tight ends that are proven to be dynamic players in the passing game. Herbert's a respectable third, and then Justice Lowe has come on, and it's gonna be harder, but it's certainly doable, especially when you have maybe the best quarterback in the country on your team too. That helps as well.
Yeah, that doesn't hurt. And I thought this was a great game from Dylan, by the way, where he had to on the fly. I mean, I'm sure there was the game plan incorporates Tez a lot, every week to week, and that's why he's leading the team in targets by a large number. And I thought he did a great job of kind of on the fly switching what was kind of or I guess just adjusting to what was available. So credit to Dylan for that part. And then we talk about 3 receivers. You're kind of right, though. I think Kenyon Sadiq at this point almost lines up more as just a receiver than he does as an inline tight end. And so, like, you can almost say that he's in that group, and those are your 4 guys. Obviously, his route tree is probably not quite as extensive.
Right.
I have liked the last couple weeks seeing a little bit more of him down the field just because he's such a mismatch, both size and speed wise against linebackers. So you kind of got those 4 guys. I do think, just touching on the depth thing for a second here, when the season was starting and you were kind of going like, who's their 2 deep?
Right.
Half the guys that we would have put in that 2 deep aren't available.
Not available.
Yeah, and so that's the part that's kind of a little iffy. So I get the concern to a certain degree because, like, we would have thought Gary Bryant Jr. was going to be a part of this. There's a question about him later, and we'll touch on him there more. Kyler Casper people probably forget, he was actually out snapping Justice Lowe.
Yeah.
Until he got hurt shortly after. Well, I think it was maybe the Michigan State or the UCLA game. He got knocked out, and I think he's done for a while. We've seen him most recently, in a walking boot.
He was out of his boot though recently. He was out of his boot. I saw him out of his boot before this Michigan game. Now, does that mean he's going to be available this week? I'm not saying
no.
But maybe by Washington, he's back on the field. Maybe by the conference championship game if Oregon gets there. But he hasn't played in a while. And what he did before his injury was 1 catch, 21 yards.
Right, so, and his skill set certainly doesn't replace
correct
what Tez does. Those guys are about as polar opposite in terms of what they do on the field as they could be. and then obviously Tez. So I was just kind of running down. You had those were your top 6 guys, quote unquote, probably entering the year if everyone was healthy, and half of those guys aren't available. So it is a group that's taken some bumps here. And I did think it was notable, and maybe not surprising against Michigan, that we didn't see Jeremiah McClellan, we didn't see Ryan Pelham, we didn't see Jurion Dickey. Like those
Oh,
are
we
the
did see Ryan Pelham.
well, we did see Ryan Pelham. We just didn't see him at receiver. He was
Yes.
memorably very involved in this game. But my point is, like, those are the 3 guys that are quote unquote probably next, and
Yeah.
the fact that we didn't see any of them was kind of interesting. And I will be curious to see going forward if we see one of those guys kind of fill in a little bit to just supplement some of the snap counts, or if it's as simple as Kenyon Sadiq just plays even more and has an even bigger role. Because again, he's basically a receiver half the time he's out there in terms of what they're doing with him. I mean, they're running tunnel screens and wide receiver screens and whatnot. He's in the slot a lot. So I think they're fine, but again, you don't want to diminish the impact of losing a guy like Tez, who was on pace to break school records. I mean, I think, just to stay on that part for a second, I feel like I jinxed him a little bit, because I just had wrote about how he was going to potentially break Oregon's career records in receptions and receiving touchdowns in 2 seasons, and now he's down, and that certainly won't be the case. And depending on the length of the injury, I guess it's still possible he breaks some of the season-long records, because he's 23 catches short of that, and I think 6 touchdowns or something. So I mean, it's not impossible. He has the room to get there going down the stretch of the season when he does come back, or if he does come back. Again, we don't really have clarity on the length there, but there was a very special season that was developing, and it's probably right to just acknowledge the fact that some of those landmarks statistically he will not reach, and that's kind of a bummer for him. But you just hope he's able to play again this season.
Real quick, I know we're going to talk about Gary and another offensive lineman later on the show, but do we want to talk more then about like guys that also could step up and play, or do we want to talk about that here real quick?
Let's do that at the third question.
Okay.
Just to kind of run through. I mean, I think we kind of touched on some names, but
I just have a question to pose about the freshmen. So
hit me with it. What do you got? Let's just do it.
I mean, McClellan's played in 3 games.
Yeah.
Pelham has played in 4.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe Gresham has played at all this season.
He and Wrestler have not seen the field.
I think this is now like when we peel back the onion and we start really looking into how things play out. Like, this is one of the nitty gritty like questions that you have is, do we see Pelham play more than 4 games and burn his red shirt? Do we see McClellan play more than 4 games and burn his red shirt? Or could we see like, hey, like they're trying to preserve these guys as red shirts, so maybe McClellan has 1 more game that he can play out of these next 3 while maintaining his red shirt, and then maybe do we see a Dylan Gresham sighting? You know, if they're gonna need to go and find another receiver to play in some kind of capacity, maybe it's him because he can play in these next 3 games and it not impact his red shirt. Or maybe the most like received question we've gotten in the last 18 months is this finally the time for Jurion Dickey to see the field and to step up? It's probably Dickey if someone else plays, but I think I would go option C is we just see Sadiq play more, Lowe play more, and they roll with Evan and Trayshawn as their kind of 4 guys.
I think I kind of go there too. I think it will come down to production, and if they feel like they really need a jolt, and if one of the young guys can give it to them. Like if you're not burning redshirt years just because you need a little more depth. I think,
yes.
Oregon didn't use, it was notable Oregon didn't use McClellan at all on Saturday. It was notable that I think Dickey got in at the very end, but barely played. They didn't need those guys when the game was close. And so I think they're going to try to do I think it's been very clear this year that Dan has made an incredible amount of effort. And I would, if he wanted to get into, I'd love to pick his brain on some of the strategy with this redshirt stuff. Clearly he has no desire to get into it. I think James has asked about it a couple times and he's just been totally rebuffed. But, I don't think there's value unless those guys are really going to change games. So like, I would say, I would imagine McClellan will get to 4 because why not? And I would imagine you're careful with Pelham unless you really think he can be a difference maker for you out there? And I'm guessing they would have, if he hadn't fumbled that punt, thought if he's our number 2 punt returner, which it seemed he was, that's enough of a role to burn a redshirt year. But did he just kind of, because he had that fumble, lose that responsibility? And is that something they still want to do? Because it seemed like they were much more comfortable just sending a guy back there who's sure-handed and Evan Stewart to fair catch it, which, not to get too far down the rabbit hole into that play, I just think that's what you should have told Ryan Pelham to do in the first place. I don't necessarily blame him for trying to do too much, unless they told him to fair catch it and he didn't, and then he gave up the fumble. But I think that's kind of what you have to be thinking about here a little bit, is like, what's the actual benefit of playing one of those guys and burning a year? And unless you really think you need them, which I'm not convinced they will with these next 3 games, then my guess is you won't see those guys play. And I would think Jurion, because he has already used the redshirt year and these games don't impact his clock, would be the logical guy to be the number 4. If he's not the logical number 4, Matt, that is kind of a concern for me based upon what is needed right now. So we will see, but he seems the logical choice just based upon the game math and what's needed right now to get a bump up. But I've kind of felt that was the case for several weeks this year. When Trayshawn went down, I was like, okay, maybe this is a moment. And it was pretty clear they liked Justice a lot better, and that hasn't changed. So let's move on to the second one, and we'll get into some more stuff down the road kind of on this same topic. All right, from @Dillard Peabody, first-time question asker, great name. He asks, with Harper going down, what is the status of Matt Bedford and Dave Iuli, and what are our best options at right guard currently? Iuli was not on the injury report for the first time all year on Saturday. I believe he is available. I think that's kind of interesting given the timing of this Harper injury. We don't have full clarity on the Harper injury. I think Dan kind of downplayed it. The people we've talked to behind the scenes have kind of downplayed it. I'm guessing if Harper does miss time, it's maybe a week or two. Maybe you sit him the next 2 games and he comes back after the bye. That's speculative. That's not reporting, just to be clear. But from what we've heard, it doesn't sound like this is a super, super serious knee injury, which is fortunate because it looked kind of nasty on the TV broadcast. I mean, his knee kind of just buckled in.
It looked bad.
But it doesn't sound like this is going to cost him the rest of his season, which is great based upon what we've heard early on here. Bedford, I think, is done for the year. Have you heard anything differently, Matt, on that? Because I have not.
No, I've not heard anything either. And I think it's very evident that, we see at practice, he's just not.
He's not there.
He's not there. And at this point in the season, if there was a guy that was getting close to playing, he would be out there in some capacity doing something. And I also think that this is a case of they're rolling with what they've got. They're probably going to gamble here a little bit, and it would be a disservice to him too, especially if he wants to come back next season and get a medical hardship, which he would be eligible for.
Correct. Yep.
It would do him a real big disservice unless he's totally on board with, hey, I'm totally willing to sacrifice my year next season so that I could play in 6 games and get us to a national championship game. Like that's a really big ask, a selfish ask by the program, not the coaches, just the program in general. And I think typically you kind of see guys like, hey, like it's only 4 or 5 games. Come back next year. Like we've gotten this far without you. Save that year next year. I think that's kind of what they're doing, is getting him to be able to redshirt and being able to come back next year and get a do-over. Very much the way that Nishad Strother got this season.
Yeah. So I don't think Bedford factors. I think Iuli might, and I'll be curious. It was notable. It was Kavika. Kavika was the guy on Saturday, right? And he went out there and lined up against the best defensive lineman in the country and had some bad reps. He had some okay reps. I'm going to guess it's going to come down to Iuli's health and what they think Kavika puts on tape to determine which one of those 2 is playing right guard on Saturday.
I don't think we should read too much into Kavika getting those reps over Dave, because Iuli hasn't played yet.
Yeah,
and
right.
The worst thing you possibly could do is to throw out a guy, no matter how talented he is, coming off of an injury and making his first career snap of the season, and it being on the road in a hostile high pressure situation. And oh, by the way, you have to go against the best defensive lineman in the country. Like that was just set up for failure for Dave Iuli. Now, like that's not to say like they were just throwing Rodgers to the wolves, but that was in an emergency situation. That was the right move. Go to the guy that's played already. Neither guy probably is going to dominate against.
It's gonna be a bad matchup for anyone you put out there.
Agreed. And so throw the guy out there that's played a little bit already. He probably won't be as like anxious or juiced up, or the anxiety won't be as high, or the pressure, the nerves won't be running as much as a guy going, holy crap, I haven't played a snap all season, and now all of a sudden I've got to play against the best guy in the country. Like, shit, can I get some help here? Like, so this week will probably be a test for if Harper can't go, which we don't know. Like he could be back this week.
It's possible, yeah.
But if he can't go, I bet you this week will be the true indicator of let's see where Rodgers is at. Let's see where Iuli is at. Can he play? And if those two guys don't work, it probably falls to Pickard.
Maybe Pickard. I think the other name would be Janoris Wilson.
True.
Who's been used quite a bit in their 14-player personnel. So I think those are the four names to know right now. And I lean it more than anything being Kavika's probably, based upon what we saw, next man up. But I wouldn't be surprised if like Iuli has a great week of practice and they're like because when you come off the injury report, you're not always at 100%. So like he'd been on the injury report the entire season. He was questionable against Illinois. He's now back. My guess is if it looks like he looks closer to who he was, he has a real chance to be the player to replace Harper. If it doesn't look that way, I lean it's probably just Kavika again on Saturday, with Wilson and Pickard being other names to kind of know here. I don't think interior offensive line depth is amazing. I think fortunately, even if Harper is to miss a game or two, I don't know if that's going to be something that we're watching going, oh my gosh, this offensive line is totally broken. Because I do think these guys are at least capable of filling in for the short term. All right. Third question comes in from @DWeather5. On a scale of 1 to now, how bad do we need GB Jr., that would be Gary Bryant Jr., and Matthew Bedford back as we get into the last leg of the season? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. We've already done half of this. We just touched on Bedford. Sure. I don't think he's back. How bad do they need him? I mean, it'd be great if he was available to play. It's just this guy's not been practicing recently. And then unfortunately with Gary Bryant Jr., it's the same thing. I don't have a great explanation for it, because it seems like he's kind of been in the same spot the whole year. But when we were out at practice last week, he wasn't at either of the days, and I thought that was notable. So we'll see with Gary. Again, this would be a great time for him to be available. I mean, I think people have downplayed his skill set, because a year ago he kind of, I should say, going into this season, it was like, well, he's not as good as Evan. He's not as good as Trayshawn. He's not as good as Tez, like whatever. But at this point, with where they're at, like he could come back and immediately be one of your better guys. So that would be great if he was available. But I don't know, Matt. I don't know if you disagree again, but this is a guy I just don't expect to see anytime soon, based upon what we've seen at practice.
Yeah, he's probably also a guy that they're pursuing either a medical hardship waiver, because he's already redshirted, so he can't use this season as a redshirt and just play effectively the last 3 games and then be able to play throughout postseason play. I don't have a lot of confidence that he plays. I think we need to ask Dan Lanning, the availability of these guys for the season, not just for this week, but for the season. But if he does play, it's a huge boost. I mean, he got 442 yards and 6 touchdowns, or 4 touchdowns last season, sorry. And he had 30 catches. And he was like very clearly the 3rd or 4th option on the team. And if you throw him into the mix this season, he would be kind of right around where Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart were this season, like number 2, number 3 guy. And to his credit, like I think he would instantly become number 1 or number 2 in terms of downfield blocking. And that was something that they have improved on significantly this season, but early in the year, they were not good. And it was very clear they were missing his blocking down the field. And Lanning talked about, he never really highlighted like one specific area, but just always said, we need to be better at blocking down the field to kind of allow our guys to turn a 10-yard gain into a 20-yard gain or a 30-yard gain. And that's like code for our receivers aren't blocking well enough downfield. And this would be maybe your best guy in that area. And there is a huge value in that, especially for a guy like Justice Lowe, who's improved and turned into a pretty good downfield blocker himself, but also Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart, two guys where Stewart's got the speed right away, and Trayshawn's the one where if you let him get into his gait and he starts getting into stride, good luck catching him because he's physical, big, and he's pretty fast.
Well, and just to build off that for a small second there, if you need a boost in the screen game, what better way to get a boost than somebody who's an awesome blocker? Because I think we'll all admit losing Tez will hurt them in terms of their ability to really make plays in the screen game. That doesn't mean they don't have guys who can do it. We've seen Kenyon have a ton of success the last couple of weeks. I thought Justice looked pretty good out there in space, and we've seen Trayshawn certainly targeted there. I'd like to see more of Evan Stewart there. It seems like his route tree is basically just downfield. But we know he's pretty good with the ball in his hands when he has had it. So, but regardless, like a player like Gary coming back would be significant. I just am skeptical we see him, to be honest. And I think there's like him, Bedford, Jaleel. There's these guys that are clearly, if available, difference makers who just haven't really been seemingly working towards getting back. But we'll see. Maybe we'll see a change here. And maybe we'll come out to practice on Tuesday and all these guys will be out there and we'll say, oh my gosh, like this is great. But my guess is we'll come out on Tuesday and see neither Gary or Bedford again. And just kind of the reality is the guys they have are the guys they have. And, as we've talked through this segment, they don't have maybe the same top tier talent that they did prior to these guys going down. But I'm not super concerned for this month. I'm more concerned about what this could mean long term.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up this edition of the Autzen Audibles Mailbag. Welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Mailbag. Real quick, just while we went to break, 4:30 kick next weekend at Camp Randall. Eric and I will be there. Excited to see you jump around. There'll be a night game, Eric. Probably not what Oregon was hoping for.
Yeah, but I put my fist because I didn't really want to do the whole early morning thing.
I agree. That's how I am too. I did not want big noon kickoff. So once that became very clear that was going to Colorado, I was excited either way.
Yeah, 4:30 is great. Let's do it. Yeah, it'll be an evening game out there. I think that could make for a fun atmosphere. But you're right. It seems like weird things happen the later you get in the evening, and you also wonder. I know we were just talking about this last week. What the temperature is like. Is there any precipitation? Like, does this feel like Oregon's first? Is this Oregon's first weather game? They haven't had one this year.
So early last week, it was supposed to be 60 degrees and sunny in Madison that week. And now I checked yesterday and it's dipped to 47 degrees. So winter is coming apparently in Madison.
We will bring our winter jackets. All right, let's get that. There we go. The schedule is coming together here. Got a couple of 4 o'clock-ish, 4:30s in a row here after a couple of 12:30s. Fourth question comes from Grizzle Muffin, another great name. Should Oregon win out, would you rather see Indiana or a rematch with Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, and why? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. And then he had this in parentheses. He says, P.S. I rescind my previous gripes with this team. Too much heartbreak in the past to make it makes it hard to believe sometimes. So he's he'd have to remind me what his gripes were previously, but clearly he had some, and he's feeling pretty good about where things are at. Well, I think my answer is pretty straightforward. I think Ohio State's probably better than Indiana. So
yeah.
I mean, if you want Oregon to win the game and be the one, and by the way, Oregon definitely controls its own destiny in terms of being the number one overall seed in the college football playoff. I mean, I guess Miami's also undefeated, but I don't think there's any metrics out there that would suggest the college football playoff would have them over Oregon, and their schedule is real soft to finish. So to me, it's like, who do you think Oregon beats in a one-game playoff? And quote unquote in a neutral site? Indiana, I'm guessing, is going to have the fan advantage in Indianapolis. Just a thought. Ohio State would as well, but I just think in terms of which team is better, I still think Ohio State has the elite talent, and I think that would be the team you'd probably least like to see. I will also say Indiana's been playing some pretty damn good ball, and if you
Oh,
want to look,
sure. Absolutely.
if you want to compare the head-to-head most recently of like Indiana beat Nebraska 56-7, and Ohio State won by 3, I think, and needed some kind of end of game heroics to get out of that game. So maybe I'm overlooking this and looking at more at the name on the jersey as opposed to what we're seeing on the field. But I think you'd still rather play Indiana than Ohio State for a shot to be the number 1 seed.
Well, I think this one's pretty easy. Unless you're just some kind of psycho and you want to pick like the toughest path possible. But if I was making a path to a championship, I don't care who you play. You just want to win and you want to get there.
Yeah.
And I would much rather play the 57th most talented team in the country than the 3rd most talented team in the country per the 24/7 Sports college team composite, which granted, that's Ohio State at number 3. They have on paper a more talented team than Oregon does. Now, both teams have injuries, but Ohio State's offensive line is a mash unit. They had to move like their right guard to left tackle against Penn State, and he was okay. Like he wasn't bad, but it wasn't like, oh, that was a smooth transition. We'll be fine.
They basically took their best interior lineman and said, "Let's just see if he can do it for a game."
Yeah.
And he did it. And to your point, he was fine, but he also gave up some sacks, and it wasn't always pretty.
Correct. Oregon's without Tez Johnson, and think about how important of a player he was in that Ohio State game. So, like I would much rather just have the easiest path to success and don't make life harder than it needs to be. So give me Indiana. I know that they would have the in-state game being played in Indianapolis, and Bloomington's not very far away from Indy from a drive perspective. That stadium would be pretty much red, but that was going to be the case no matter who you played, whether it was Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State, or in this case, Indiana. Like Oregon will have a good chunk of fans there, but it was always going to be a neutralish road game for Oregon. Very similar to Georgia. There were a lot of Duck fans at that Georgia game, but they were just completely outnumbered. And so that was always going to be the case. So give me Indiana. I think that one's an easy pick. They're certainly improved, but on paper, they're nowhere near the same team that Oregon or Ohio State is. And quite honestly, like we'll figure out real quick this weekend when they play at home against Michigan. Like I know Michigan's 5-4, but that defense is really good, and we will see how truly good this Indiana team has become when they play a team with loaded NFL players all over the place.
Yeah, I'm pretty sold Indiana is good. I'm not sold they're better than Ohio State. But the cool thing is we get to find out on the field when they play in Columbus, and I think is that during Oregon's bye week, by the way?
It is.
Which
that'll be a fun game to watch on a Saturday with no duck action.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Duck fans, there you got your viewing there on Saturday pretty set. That's basically a play-in game to play Oregon. You get a sense on the field of which team you think you'd rather play in real time. But yeah, I think we're both like, bring on the Hoosiers if it comes down to one of these two teams. Oregon used to be in a situation maybe in the Pac-12 where it was like you have to beat all the good teams to make sure you get the right seeding, to make sure you get in. They're not in that spot anymore. They're in a spot where they're the definitive number 1 team, unanimous in the AP. I think they'll be I think they'll be pretty clearly the team atop the first college football playoff rankings, which are released on Tuesday. So they don't need any help with the schedule. They've already done what they've done, and there's not a team out there with a resume that's better. And so playing Ohio State just to play Ohio State maybe would be fun from a, hey, let's play another really good football team. But if you're talking about trying to win a national championship and achieve those goals, you want to be the number 1 seed. And I think playing Indiana gives you a much better chance to achieve that. All right. Last one from @need my whole name. Is there a consistent reason for struggles in the third quarter? I get coasting in the second half, but this seems more than that at this point. Just to read the basics here, I know they did this last week, but I'll do it again here. Opponents are now outscoring Oregon 30-29 in the third quarter. It's the only quarter where it's even close. In the first quarter, Oregon has been beating teams 76-30. In the second, 129-48, and in the fourth, 84-34. So for the rest of the game, they're outscoring teams by like 187 points. There's just the one quarter where they don't do it. And the other point I would make is part of why I've been downplaying this is they go to the half with these massive leads in Big Ten play. They've outscored teams in the first half 155 to 44. And if you want to just, what does that mean on a game to game? That's like a 26-7 average halftime score. So
they've had one game where they've not had a 3-score lead at halftime.
And that was Ohio State.
Yes.
So, and that was a 1-point lead. So that lays the groundwork for why I think Dan has downplayed some of this, because it hasn't been a problem. I think this is why when Jared and I did our pod last week and we got a question about this, we both kind of said it's not costing them games. It's not like these games are getting really hairy at the end. I did think, on Saturday, especially on rewatch, I didn't feel like they necessarily coasted as much as Michigan played really well. And so I don't know if there's a consistent thing, but I will say, like, you can't really argue with the stats here in terms of what they tell you about the third quarter, which is that this is by far Oregon's worst quarter of the game. I mean, 29-30, they're scoring. I mean, it's almost, they scored basically 100 fewer points this season in the third quarter compared to the second quarter. So I'm still kind of like not super concerned. The question is about the reason for these struggles, though. And I'll just say, like, I want to give some credit to the opposition for responding and for going into the half and making some adjustments.
Sure.
But I also think, like, maybe it's human nature when you get hit by a lot to kind of keep the foot down. And I would think because of that, this seems like something that Dan and staff would be really motivated to correct if that's part of what is this this calculus, because that sort of a mentality can be a problem when you get into games with much better competition. Like if you're up 28-10 against Georgia or 28-10 against Texas or Miami in a college football playoff game, and you let them come out and dominate a third quarter, and suddenly the game is 31-24, that's not something that you're going to be real thrilled about if that's what's happening in December or January. So I don't have a real consistent reason for it, though, other than like the opposition's making adjustments. I do think, like, people have been critical of the play calling. I get some of that. Like Oregon had 2 possessions on offense on Saturday.
One of them went the length of the field almost.
One went the length of the field for a field goal. The other one was stopped for like basically a 3 and out. And I didn't love throwing a screen pass to your
Patrick Herbert.
Yeah, and it wasn't well executed. I think Johnny Cornelius kind of a little bit late getting out there to make the block, and so it didn't go anywhere. But the play calling argument, I don't know if I really buy into entirely, because it's like, okay, so they ran it up the middle, they had an incompletion, and they threw a screen pass. Like, is that the recipe for, like, oh, they're not trying to score? I don't know, as much as it is like those plays didn't work against a Michigan defense that was like booed right as they went to the locker room, and they came back out and had a lot to play for. So that's kind of where my head's at. Will I say it's been good? No, because that would be disingenuous. But I'm also like kind of still thinking this is something to be downplayed. And I don't have a real consistent or a real answer to what's the reason for it, Art. Do you?
I don't have a reason. I have an answer for why it's happening. I think maybe there's this idea where it's, hey, we're up by 3 scores essentially in every game except for one, and let's just get out of here without any injuries. Let's don't be aggressive to the point where maybe we throw a pick 6. It's kind of similar to like a 2-minute drill at the end of the half or something, where it's like you want to run the ball maybe first down so the clock starts and you don't give an opportunity for 3 quick passing plays and the opponent gets the ball and they have plenty of time now to go the other length of the field to score just before half. So it's kind of like maybe get the clock moving, maybe get a first down, maybe get 2 first downs via the run game, hopefully, and then open things up, because then by then you've chewed up a couple minutes of clock and they're just not executing on first down. I don't know. Am I concerned by it? A little. Like, out of a scale of 1 out of 10, 10 being the most concerned, it'd probably be like a 3, maybe a 4. Like, It's something you need to get better at, but at the same time, you have a 3-score lead in 5 of your 6 Big Ten games, and it's at that point, it's more about, hey, Don't give your opponent extra opportunities to score. Just play sound football, and you do that, you're going to get out of here with a win. And I think you also need to look at the opponents that this has come against. UCLA, Michigan State, Purdue, Illinois, and Michigan are all teams that you look at their offense and it's, hey, against us being Oregon, it's going to be really hard for these teams to score 3 more times than us in the first half. Let's just play sound football and get out of here quickly. Their offense is not geared to come back from this unless we as an Oregon give you that opportunity to do it. So like the need to continue to like points are awesome. It'd be awesome to score 50 something points a game, but like at halftime, these games are at a point where it's just don't mess it up. You know, because the other teams that they've played against, they're not built to come back from that unless you give them the door and the pathway to it.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is this is also Oregon's best defensive quarter, or tied with the first quarter in terms of scoring. Allowed 30 points. I think Michigan, with their 7 on Saturday, became the first team to score a touchdown in the third quarter, going back to, I can't remember exactly when. Probably people in the comments will be screaming at me because it's probably really obvious. I apologize. But my point is also like, it's not like they're getting drubbed in this quarter. Right. I mean, they're losing by 1 point so far this year. And I think there's probably some validity to what you're saying in terms of just like, let's just not screw it up. But I also watch a lot of these plays in the third quarter and go like, I don't really see a huge difference in terms of what they're trying to achieve. It doesn't look like they're fully taking the foot off the gas. I mean, they're running kind of their offense. I mean, how many times do you see them open a drive in the first half with, you know, a run between the tackles, something kind of short or intermediate on second down, and then based upon third down, kind of pick your poison. And that's basically what happened on their first drives on Saturday. Well, they got a 4-yard gain on first down. Second down was a play that didn't work. And if that play does work, they move the chains and maybe the drive continues. So we're probably almost spending too much time talking about this, but I guess part of why I feel the way I feel is that Dan doesn't seem to be bothered by it like at all, and seems agitated that people are talking about it. But it's also this glaring thing because the stats are so I mean, it is like this thing where you look at the stats on that and you go, that is like a thing that's become a trend. And so I don't know. I'm probably more dismissive of this than I should be, and I know some fans are really concerned about this. I also think when you're 9-0 and seemingly everything is working, you kind of try to find a thing or two to be worried about, and this kind of seems like the thing right now. Like for a while, it was red zone turnovers, or it was the offensive line play, or defense not getting stops, you know, on third down for a couple of games. And now it's certainly, hey, these third quarters are a problem. And I won't lie, it got a little bit more nerve-wracking in the end of the third quarter there, and the fourth quarter against Michigan than it felt like it was. I watched the game with my dad, and we went to half kind of going like, oh, Oregon's in great space. And then you're kind of midway through that third quarter and into the early part of the fourth quarter going like, I know they're going to win, but this is getting a little bit more stressful than it felt like it needed to be. So yeah, I get it from a fan perspective of watching these games and feeling that way. I just also think I'll tell you that like I'm not on high alert for this yet.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for submitting your questions. We'll have full coverage leading up to Saturday's 4 p.m. Big Ten Network game, the last one on that channel. For those of you out there wondering, leading up to that game on duckterritory.com. So we'll have full coverage of that. We'll also have full coverage today of men's and women's basketball. Eric goes first. He gets a women's game at Matt Knight Arena, and then I will show up later tonight as well for the men's home opener, season opener. So go to duckterritory.com today and tomorrow for full coverage of basketball as well. But until the next podcast, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.